They called it the ash market, though there was no ash-only silence and the stink of finality. The grand auction had ended. Gleaming ships cut lines across the red dust sky, taking away the last of the bioengineered workers, the slaves born or bred into servitude across the outer colonies. The buyers, fat-limbed and too richly perfumed to belong on a dying rock like Viren 6, had long vanished. Their ships left only echoing tremors in the bones of the market walls. Steel scaffolds creaked like old lungs. The amphitheater seats were empty, littered with wrinkled data sheets, bidding records, and melted drink tubes. And yet one cage still remained locked. He sat in the dark behind polysteel bars that hadn't opened in what felt like an eternity. He wasn't big or beautiful or valuable by the merchant scanners. His limbs were too long for his narrow torso, covered in a fine velvet blue fur. His ears twitched constantly, not from curiosity, but trauma his species were sensory. Beings made to feel too much. They had called him lot number 943 discard. Not even a name. His digits clung to a shredded woolen blanket, the only kindness left to him, though it was not warmth it gave, but memory. He watched the last auction droid power down in a flicker of dull green lights, and he realized it was over. Everyone had been sold. All but him. The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was like being buried alive. For a time, he sat unmoving, listening to the distant sounds of wind sweep the sand over metal floors. His large reflective eyes blinked slowly. No food pellet chutes had dropped today, no water tube refilled. He counted the hours by the light that leaked from a cracked dome above, until even that faded into a sulphurous dusk. Alone, he waited. Then came the footsteps. At first, he thought it was a guard drone doing a final sweep, until the footsteps crunched wrong, too uneven, too human. He tilted his head, something primal stirring in his gut. A predator? A savior? A mistake? The shape that emerged from the shadows of the hall was hunched, burdened by bags and travel gear, cloaked in dust. But the shape was unmistakable, a human, alone. She moved slowly, as though unsure she belonged there, blinking up at the broken vendor signs and scanning half-dead holoboards with interest. She wore no uniform, no buyer's crest, and certainly no weapon he could see. Just her and a faint limp that made each step seem more personal, like the floor hurt her. She paused near the auction cage and looked in. Their eyes met. He did not speak, not because he lacked the language, but because silence was safer. Every species that had owned him wanted obedience, not conversation, yet her eyes didn't scan him like an item. She stared like she was seeing something she wasn't expecting, not horror, not pity. Recognition. For several long seconds, neither of them moved. Then she crouched, slowly, as if not to startle an animal. "Is this unit still for sale?" she said aloud, turning her head toward a deactivated auction terminal nearby. No response came from the darkened machine. Her voice echoed back, lonely but firm. She pulled a small device from her pocket, a battered old trade pass with a gold stripe, blinking with a red low battery icon. She tapped it against the terminal, and the interface blinked to life for one last transaction. The price was laughable. Lot number 943 discard. Clearance unfit for labor. She hesitated before pressing confirm. Not because of the cost, it was nothing, but because of the responsibility. Her fingers hovered, trembling slightly, not from fear, but from something deeper. Something old? Guilt, maybe? Or a memory. She pressed it. The cage clicked. He flinched as the locks released with a hiss. For the first time in years, he could leave. But he didn't. Not yet. He looked at the woman, the human, not understanding. "I'm not here to buy a slave," she said softly, standing straight now, face lined with exhaustion, but eyes steady. "I'm here because no one else came back for you." Still, he didn't move. "I don't have much," she continued, brushing dust from her jacket, "but I don't throw people away." He stared at her, heart pounding faster now. Something cracked in his chest, some wall built by years of rejection. One foot moved forward, then another. He stepped out into the air if it didn't smell like rust and urine anymore. And when he finally crossed the threshold, she did not touch him, did not leash or order or praise. She simply walked beside him, matching his stride. Behind them, the market lights faded to black. Before them, the stars waited. He didn't know her name. She didn't know his species, but the future had just changed. Forever. Asterisk. The wind followed them as they walked. Not violent, but relentless, the kind of wind that whispered through the bones of abandoned places and stirred old ghosts. The human moved with an unhurried, almost reverent calm, as if she knew the ground itself had stories to tell. She didn't ask him questions. She didn't demand he keep up. She simply moved ahead, glancing back now and then to make sure he hadn't vanished. In truth, part of him wanted to. The cage, as cold and cruel as it had at least been known. But now, freedom smelled like strange dust and tasted like fear. They stopped at a slope of shattered glass and carboncrete, where the bones of a transport ship lay rusting in the red sun. She had made her camp there, hidden behind fractured metal, shielded from scanners. The remnants of a fire pit sat cold nearby, and a small grav lantern flickered overhead. She dropped her bag with a sigh and stretched her arms, revealing the patches and welds of her jacket repairs made with love or desperation. He couldn't tell. Hungry? She asked. He didn't answer. He wasn't sure if he was allowed to. The woman didn't push. She just pulled a small ration bar from her belt pouch, broke it in half, and laid one piece on a clean cloth between them. No offering, no command. Just a silent invitation. He waited, half expecting a trick. But the human took a bite of her piece and chewed thoughtfully, like she was tasting stars instead of synth food. Finally, hunger overrode hesitation. He crouched slowly, picked up the bar, and nibbled. It was stale, slightly bitter. But it was his. And no one beat him for taking it. As night coiled in around the ruin, the human lit a low flame, just enough to see her face. She had sharp lines carved from age or war, maybe both, but there was a softness beneath the tired eyes. A softness that hadn't been burned away, not yet. Her hands, though scarred and calloused, moved gently as she unpacked small items from her bag: a cracked photograph, a ragged thermal blanket, a polished stone etched with symbols he didn't recognize. These weren't weapons. These were relics of a life that still held meaning. You can sleep here if you want, she murmured. I don't snore much, not anymore. He tilted his head, fur bristling with unease. Why did you take me? She didn't look at him right away. Instead, she leaned back, staring up at the open sky where stars bled through clouds like scattered needles of light. Because someone should have, she said finally. Because I've seen that look in your eyes before, and I know what it means. To be left behind. He lowered his gaze, heat rising in his chest, not anger, but something deeper. Something like sorrow finding a voice. My kind were made to sense emotion, he said slowly, voice trembling from long misuse. We feel too much. It makes us break easily. That's why they didn't want me. The woman turned toward him then, her expression unreadable but not unkind. Then they were fools. Feeling too much isn't weakness, it's survival. It's human. That word, human, spoken as if it were a badge of honor instead of a species label. He let it settle into his mind like a seed. She asked him no more questions that night. Instead, she hummed an old earth melody off key and cracked, like a lullaby stitched from broken memories. It drifted through the cold like a balm. He found himself curling closer to the fire, not from cold, but from instinct. Safety was a scent, a rhythm, and he sensed no danger from her, only quiet pain and stubborn warmth. Eventually, sleep came for both of them. In the morning, he woke first. The sky was bruised with dawn. The woman slept curled into herself, her blanket half fallen. He watched her chest rise and fall and felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years. Curiosity. About her. About why she'd returned to an auction no one else cared about. About why she'd seen value in him when machines had declared him worthless. Her words echoed, I've seen that look before. He wondered whose eyes she'd seen it in. A friend? A child? A soldier? She stirred, mumbling something in her sleep. A name, Lena, and a word that sounded like forgive. He stood slowly and walked to the edge of the wreckage, looking out over the jagged plains of Viron 6. Somewhere in the distance, mining drills still echoed, and slave ships still flew. But here, in this broken cradle of steel and firelight, he stood not as a tool, but as someone who had been chosen, not bought, not claimed. Chosen. When she finally woke and found him standing there, she didn't call to him. She just joined him, arms folded, eyes on the same horizon. Memes Kira, she said softly. Figured we should fix that silence between us. He hesitated, heart drumming like a trapped bird. Then quietly, he answered, I was called Unit 943. But that's not who I am. She smiled, and it wasn't pity, it was pride. Then let's find out who you are. Together, they walked into the sun. The days on Viron 6 were long, like unwinding ribbons of copper light, each moment stretched taut between survival and silence. The two travelers, one born of stars, the other forged in cages, moved together now, never far from one another, yet still separated by the ghosts each carried. Kira didn't talk much, not about her past, and certainly not about why she had wandered back to a slave market long after the merchants had closed shop. but her actions spoke in ways words could not. She shared water even when it was low. She split food without pause. She shielded him during the sandstorms, though her jacket barely covered herself. It was in these acts that trust began to take root, not quickly, but persistently, like grass pushing through concrete. He had never walked freely before, not outside an assigned labor zone. Each step on open ground felt strange, like dreaming. While awake, the wind against his fur was no longer the chill of prison air, but the breath of wildness. For the first time, he noticed the colors of the sky when it wept orange at dusk, or how the stars burned not as overseers, but as watchers, and Kirashi never rushed him. She let him pause when a memory seized his chest, or when the broken cry of some other creature in the distance reminded him too much of a friend lost. She understood without needing to ask. One night, as they rested beneath a jagged overhang where the moons hung low and violet, he sat staring at the fire, turning over a small silver disc she had given him. It was smooth, etched with symbols. He couldn't read, but he felt the emotion behind the gift. It wasn't a token of ownership. It was an offering of connection. He finally asked, "Who is Lena?" Kira stiffened, her hand tightening slightly on the old blanket draped over her. "Mies." For a moment, she didn't answer. Then her voice came low and rough. "She was my sister," she said. "You would have liked her. She cared too much, too loudly, got her in trouble." He looked at her carefully, tilting his head. "What happened?" Kira drew a breath like she was trying to swallow a wound. "The Empire took her. Said she was too empathetic to lead, too soft to command. They said she was interfering with the slave protocols. So they branded her a sympathizer. I wasn't there when they did it. I was off-world, running comms. By the time I returned, she was gone." The fire crackled, throwing shadows across her face. She looked older in that moment, not by age, but by weight. "I tried to fight it," she whispered. "I reported it, protested. You know what they did? Demoted me. Shipped me to the edges. Made me scrub outposts in places even drones won't go." She shook her head. "I gave up fighting. Thought maybe Lena had been wrong to believe in kindness. Then I saw you." He felt the breath hitch in his throat. "You had her eyes." She sighed, meeting his gaze. "That's why I stayed." His voice was trembling when he spoke. "My species, we weren't born free. We were designed, grown in tanks, trained in batches, no names. No parents, just programs." Kira didn't interrupt. She listened, not just heard, but truly listened. With her entire being focused on him, they said emotions made us defective. That love was a virus, so they erased it when they could. And when they couldn't, they sold us cheaper. He stared at the fire, his eyes wide and glossy. "But I remember one. She was like me. She used to hum, even when the guards beat her. They took her away after she kissed another slave on the forehead. Just touched them, that was all." He turned to Kira, voice barely a whisper. "They said she had corrupted us." Kira moved, then not with pity, but with a quiet fury, a burning ache that lived in the marrow of the betrayed. She reached out and gently placed her hand on his. It wasn't command. It wasn't charity. It was solidarity. "No one gets to tell you what your heart is worth," she said. "Not ever again." The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was sacred. A communion between two souls fractured in different ways, now finding something whole in the other. He didn't know how to say thank you. Not in any language that matched the depth of what he felt, but Kira didn't need words. She just smiled. That small, tired smile of someone who'd been drowning for years and had just now found a place to breathe. Later that night, as he watched her sleep beneath the stars, he whispered something to the wind. "My name is Kale." It felt strange on his tongue, his own name, chosen not given. Spoken not assigned out, the wind carried it upward. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. It was on the 7th night. As they crested the ridge beyond the pale scar canyon, that Kale felt the first shiver of unease ripple. Through the air, not a breeze or a chill, but something deeper. A wrongness. The wind had stopped. Even the rocks beneath their feet seemed to hold their breath. The stars blinked above, but their light felt harsher, like the sky was watching. Kira noticed it too. She paused mid-step, one hand drifting slowly toward the scanner clipped to her belt. "That's odd," she muttered. No wildlife, no night calls. This area was never this silent. Kale's ears twitched, catching subtle frequencies most species never heard. Something's coming. They set up camp inside a half-buried maintenance dome long abandoned, covered in soot and mines. Kira lit a faint electromagnetic shield, just enough to blur their heat signature. She didn't sleep that night. Kale didn't either. When morning came, the sun rose blood orange, casting long shadows across the desert scrub. As they prepared to move, Kira's communicator blinked to life for the first time in days. A priority message scrolled across the cracked screen in urgent red text. Warning, Asset 943 missing, tagged bioform, Imperial Biowarfare classified. Reward issued, use extreme caution. Kale saw it before she could close the screen. His legs buckled beneath him. I didn't know, she said instantly, voice tight with horror. You don't understand. He breathed, panic rising like bile. They didn't just grow us. They used us. They bred my type not just to feel, but to infect others with emotion intensity, empathy, grief. We were engineered to soften minds before conquest. I was a precursor weapon, sent into enemy populations to destabilize mental unity. My empathy wasn't a flaw. It was the design. His whole body trembled now, memories flooding back guards with faces stained in tears without knowing why. Prisoners turning against captors after one conversation, entire outposts collapsing from within. He hadn't just survived the system. He'd been part of it, a tool sharpened by sorrow. Kira sat down beside him, her expression unreadable, her body still, like a mountain bracing for a storm. She didn't move away. She didn't reach for her weapon. Kale, she said, voice steady, look at me. He couldn't. He saw only the destruction he must have caused. The families he had unmade without ever lifting a hand. The suicide of a warden on Varel 3 who touched his fur once and wept until his gun found his mouth. Kale covered his face and let out a low, pained moan. Look at me. He turned slowly. I'm not afraid of you, she said. I'm afraid of what made you. Tears burned down his face, soaking into his fur. You don't understand. If I stay with you, if I get close, I might break you too. You're not a disease, she said. You're a mirror. And they used you to make people see themselves see. What they buried, that's not your fault. That's theirs. Her hand gripped his shoulder, firm, real. And let me tell you something, Kale, the Empire didn't issue that warning because they fear your damage. They fear your healing. They're afraid people will feel too much to follow orders. They're scared you'll make monsters realize they've still got souls. Kale gasped because he'd never considered that. That maybe his function wasn't destruction, but awakening. They want you hunted because if enough people meet you, like I did, they won't be able to look away from what they've done. Suddenly, the threat made sense. He wasn't a secret anymore. He was proof of what they'd done and who they'd broken. And Kira, just by standing beside him, had made herself a target too. You should leave me, he said hoarsely. Go. Dark, go off-world. They won't follow you if you give me up. Kira looked at him like he'd just spoken a different language. I didn't come here to save a weapon. I came to remember who I was. He blinked. What do you mean? She reached into her jacket and pulled out a folded piece of plastic memory cloth. She unwrapped it carefully, revealing a datapad so old its screen flickered like a dying star. On it was a medical log. Patient number 17, Lena Ardent, subject of empathic contagion trial. Code C943. My sister didn't just die, Kira said. She volunteered. She let herself be exposed to one of the prototypes to prove you weren't dangerous. She believed in your species. She believed in you. And when the Empire found out, they erased the whole program. Burned the labs, scrubbed the trials. And they sold off the test subjects as broken property. Kale stared, shaking. She gave up her life for us, Kira nodded slowly. So no, I'm not leaving you. Because if I do, she dies in vain. And so do you. Kale wept openly now for Lena, for the broken others like him, and for this strange, fierce human who saw not a weapon, but a wounded being still worthy of love. The silence between them was not empty anymore, it was filled with purpose, and for the first time in a long, long time, he didn't feel alone. They ran under moonless skies, their shadows swallowed by the earth as sirens wailed far behind them, distant, but growing closer. The reward placed on Kale's head had spread across subspace networks like blood and water. Bounty ships now combed forensics, scanning for any trace of empathic leakage. Drones had begun dropping from the upper thermals, programmed to sterilize their quarry rather than capture. The Empire did not want Kale back. They wanted him gone. Kira and Kale didn't speak much as they moved. There was no time for words. Now only action. She knew the terrain well enough to find tunnels carved by old mining guilds, pathways long since forgotten by colonists. In the silence, Kale noticed something new in her gait, urgency laced with pain. Her limp had worsened, subtle at first, but now more pronounced. She gritted her teeth through it, never once asking to slow. But Kale saw the blood pooling in her boot when she thought he wasn't looking. They stopped in a cavern choked with luminous moss and ancient machinery, the walls humming with forgotten energy. Here, hidden beneath a rock that bore the scarring of energy blasts, Kira produced a transmitter no bigger than a pebble. She tapped out a coded signal. It pulsed twice, then 3 times, then silence. What was that? Kale asked. Old contact, she said through a clenched jaw. Someone who owes me favors. He's got a ship that's off registry. If we can reach the Jareth Wastes before nightfall tomorrow, we can be off-world before they tighten the net. Kale hesitated. You're not going to make it. Your leg, I've had worse, she lied, but he could feel the agony bleeding from her thoughts like ink. That night, she passed out from blood loss. Kale sat by her side, watching her chest rise and fall as if each breath might be the last. His fingers trembled over her forehead, not touching, just feeling. He focused, reaching into the fragile space between his species' gift and its curse. He had never done this willingly. Always, the emotion poured through him like fire through a broken pipe. But now, he centered his breathing, remembered Lena's name, remembered the girl who had hummed lullabies even while dying, and he focused all the empathy he had, all the warmth into his presence beside Kira, and she stirred, her lips parted. A word escaping. Lena? No, he whispered. But I quarry her light. She opened her eyes, weak but aware. She saw him, sitting vigil, and tried to sit up. He gently pushed her back down. We're changing the plan. What plan? She murmured, dazed. I'm turning myself in. Her eyes shot wide. No, Kale, no, they'll kill you. I know, he said. But if I don't, they'll track us to your contact. They'll never stop. They'll torch the planet to erase me. She tried to argue, but he silenced her with a look she'd never seen on him before. Not fear, not grief, not conviction. I'm not doing this to run away, he said. I'm doing it to buy you time. You said Lena believed in me? So do I, but that means I have to make my choice mean something. Kira gritted her teeth. There's another way. There has to be. If there was, Kale whispered, we wouldn't still be running. She reached out and grabbed his hand, her fingers rough, shaking. If you go, you die alone, in chains. Kale looked into her eyes, and something ancient passed between them, a truth older than the stars. Not alone, not anymore. I carry. All of you with me now, Lena, the others, you. A single tear slipped down her cheek. Not because he was leaving, because she understood. You stubborn, stupid, beautiful soul. She choked. He smiled. That's the most human thing I've ever been called. Before dawn, he left her with the transmitter. Cloaked in the shadows of the canyon, she tried to follow, crawling despite the pain, but he was already gone dot and in the distance when the sun rose. So did the scream of engines. Kale walked into the mouth of the storm, not as prey, but as a torch the darkness. Could not unmake ******. The Empire didn't believe in trials for biological weapons, especially not ones that made people cry without cause. Kale was given no cell, no contact, no last meal. Just containment glass walls, 6 inches thick and pulsing with biodampeners that strangled every sensory nerve in his body. His fur lay flat and lifeless against his skin. Even his heartbeat sounded faint inside his skull. They didn't want a prisoner. They wanted a subject, a specimen, a mistake made flesh and bone. Outside the tank stood Commander Rellan, a man with eyes like dead stars and a uniform so crisp it cut the air around him. He didn't look at Kale as a living thing. He looked at him the way you look at a bomb you're deciding whether to bury or detonate. So this is it, Rellan muttered too. The aides flanking him? The last of the empathy contagions. Kale didn't respond. He saved what little strength he had. His lungs were raw from the suppression gas, and the neuroclamps laced through the cell made every thought feel like wading through tar. But still he watched, he felt. Even muted, he knew. He saw the younger guard shift nervously when their eyes met. The flicker of doubt. The twitch of a lip that wasn't anger but shame. They were already breaking. Rellan turned to a halotable, summoning files, evidence, test logs data that detailed every failure Kale had never asked to be part of. They thought your kind could win wars without lifting weapons. You'd infiltrate, sow compassion like seeds, and when the time was right, populations would fold from within. But all you did was make people remember how to feel. He sneered. And that's far more dangerous. Kale lifted his head, eyes bloodshot but steady. Then why am I alive? Rellan paused. You should have killed me at capture, Kale whispered. But you didn't. You wanted to understand. Because something inside you wants to feel again. That's why you're afraid. The words sliced through the silence. Rellan's face twitched. His hands clenched, just for a moment. You're wrong, he said, but his voice betrayed him. Then a sound shattered the air, a High-pitched blast followed by a tremor so strong the glass of Kale's containment unit moaned. Red lights bloomed across the ceiling. Alarms shrieked. Guards yelled. Someone was inside the compound. A voice, cracked and alive with fury, filled the security net. You want a weapon? I'll show you one. Her name was Lena, and she died so. This lie could end. Kira, Kale's heart surged. The control station erupted in chaos. Drones scrambled. Gunfire echoed through still corridors. Relin cursed, barking orders, fingers flying across the holotable to seal off escape vectors. But the interference had already spread thought, and Kale inside his prison closed his eyes. He focused, even in suppression, even drugged. Even dying, he reached. Out with the last flicker of his power, not to control, not to destroy, but to awaken. The young guard nearest him froze mid-step, blinking rapidly. Tears welled in his eyes, uninvited. Memories burst inside his mind, his brother's laughter, the scent of his mother's coat, the hand he once let go when the Empire offered a promotion. He dropped his rifle. Kale whispered, You remember now, don't you? The guard turned. What are you? Kale didn't answer, because behind the explosion door, the walls gave way and Kira stormed through, limping but unstoppable, wearing a stolen tactical harness and eyes alight with the fury of a woman who had already buried one sibling and refused to bury another. Get the hell away from him. She screamed, raising a shock pulse rifle. Relin turned, stunned. You, yeah, Kira growled. Me. Kale's tank hissed as the power flickered, then died. The clamps failed. The biodampeners dimmed. Kale stepped forward, legs shaking but alive. He didn't run. He stood beside Kira, and for one heartbeat, time held still. Relin raised his weapon, but Kale didn't flinch. You don't have to do this, Kale said gently. You don't have to be their tool. Relin's hand trembled. They'll come for you. They already did, Kira said. And we're still standing. Relin's arm dropped out in that moment. The Empire lost something no weapon could reclaim. Its control. Alarms still roared, but it was distant now. The spell had broken. Guards stood in silence, blinking through their own memories, through guilt, through awakening. One by one, they lowered their weapons. A tide of humanity resurfacing beneath decades of obedience. Kale turned to Kira, blood dripping from his ear, exhaustion written every limb. You came back, he said. Of course I did, she said, smiling through tears. You're not alone anymore. And as the ceiling trembled and the compound began to collapse in its failure to contain what was never meant to be imprisoned, they walked out together, not as fugitives, but as truth. The sun was rising when they emerged from the compound's ruined shell, its golden light breaking through the dark clouds like hope after morning. The air was thick with ash and dust, but alive with silence, not the silence of death, but the hush that follows revelation. Kale's legs nearly gave out once they cleared the blast zone, but Kira was there, her arm beneath his, even as her own injury burned with every step. Together, they climbed a ridge overlooking the shattered command post, now a carcass of twisted metal and broken ideologies. Behind them, the people they'd freed, guards, prisoners, scientists, stood blinking in the dawn, uncertain but changed. Some cried. Others simply stared at their hands like they were seeing them for the first time. Kira dropped her rifle into the sand. It's over, she whispered. Kale didn't answer right away. He watched the light spread across the plains, watched how it kissed the broken edges of the world and made them glow. It's not over, he said softly. But it's beginning. They set up a temporary beacon later that day, sending out encrypted broadcasts not of resistance, but of truth. Kale's story, Lena's sacrifice, the Empire's hidden experiments. The message didn't call for war, it called for remembrance. And across the stars, some began to listen. In the weeks that followed, Kira and Kale traveled quietly between fringe colonies, never staying too long, but always leaving something behind a spark. They taught people how to feel again, not just how to fight. Kale sat with broken soldiers and made them weep for things they thought long buried. Kira repaired old transmitters and whispered names of the lost into their signals, so no one would be forgotten. They weren't rebels in the traditional sense. They were gardeners planting something fragile in scorched soil. One night, on a moon lit by bioluminescent trees, Kale sat by a fire while children of 3 species huddled around him. They weren't afraid of him. One small girl human, Freckles, like dust stars, curled into his side and asked him a question. Mr. Kale, is it true you made a commander cry? He smiled, eyes twinkling. Only a little. They giggled, and he felt something break inside him again, but this time, it was the wall around his joy. Later, when the children were asleep and the world was quiet again. Kira sat beside him and passed him a small, familiar item, a silver disc, newly engraved. He turned it over. On one side was Lena's name, on the other his. "I thought you might want a real nameplate," she said. "I already have one," he replied, "because you spoke it." She smiled, eyes misting. He looked up at the stars. "Do you think they'll ever really see us, the ones who still follow the Empire?" "They will," she said, "because we're not going to disappear. We're going to live, loudly, kindly, unapologetically, until they have to look." Kale nodded. Lena would have liked that. "She would have followed you anywhere," Kira said, "and now I do." They sat in silence then, not from pain, not from fear, but from peace. The war had not ended. The Empire still ruled the stars. But across those stars, cracks had begun to form. And through those cracks, light was spilling in. Kindness, empathy, Memory Dot and Kale Once Lot 943. Once a weapon was no longer a ghost in a cage. He was a voice, a choice, a symbol. Dot, when he walked now, people followed. Not because he commanded them, but because he reminded them that even in the darkest reaches of space, even after every system of control and cruelty, humanity still meant something, and sometimes the most powerful thing you could be was kind.